Hello everyone, how's everybody doing? We have another exciting day in physics today. Terrible day for mathematical physics. Terrible day for math, but great day for physics. Today we're going to look at a new guest. His name is Richard Dawkins. Some of you, or maybe a lot of you, have heard of him. And we're going to be introducing him. In fact, it comes at the heels of Mr. Al-Khalili, who I've dissected in quite a bit of detail, I think. Anyways, one way to start the day is, because we're going to be talking a little bit about science, is to figure out what science is about. And for that, you need to get to two words, very important words. And one is the how, and the other one is the why. You know, we usually use these words. We ask how. What are we asking? We ask why. What are we asking? Does the other person understand exactly what you're asking when you use how or when you use why? So let's look at this. You have someone asks, how did the ball fall? Okay. Well, there's a couple answers that you can give. You can say, well, it fell at 9.8 meters per second squared, or it fell fast. How's that for an answer? Is that what he was asking? Well, maybe he was asking something else. Maybe he was asking, you know, whether it was pushed or pulled. Maybe he's asking for a mechanism, okay? And so you have to watch out for these words because they have two senses, two meanings, two types of understanding, okay? They don't, you have to specify to the person exactly what you want him to answer, okay? And so the first one is math. It's just a description, 9.8 meters per second squared, fast. The fast part maybe not. That's it's not math, but it is a description, right? And the second one, you know, this one here is physics. We're looking for an explanation. So description is not the same thing as an explanation, okay? The first one deals with what happened, and the second one deals with how it happened. So these are different types of replies that you give to the same word how, in which is how we start, you know, a sentence, maybe a question. Okay. Then there's the why, and you know, you probably ask, you know, why did he fall? And we end up with the same type of problem. You know, maybe, I don't know, we're talking about a clown. And so you're asking either how it happened or what led to him doing something. You know, how did he fall? Well, you might say he tripped. Well, that's the mechanism. But at the same time, you can say, why did he fall? Well, because he's a clown and he was supposed to do it to make people laugh or for the show or for whatever. So in one case, you're talking about, you know, mechanisms and causes, right? And in the other one, you're talking about what? You're talking about reasons and purpose, okay? And it's these two on the right-hand side, not the one with math, not the how did he fall, you know, how fast or whatever. It's these two on the side here. Those are what form what we call science. That's what people want to know. That's in science, you know, that's what people investigate. How is it that gravity works? That's what people want. That's what people ask. Why do we ask these questions? We ask these questions because we can't see the mediator. See, if you have a pulley, you know, and you pull on a box with a rope through the pulley, well, people look and they say, okay, I understand how that happened, how the box was pulled up. But when you say, you know, the pen fell on the floor, well, now you don't see, you know, what caused it. And that's why people ask those questions and want to know, especially from the physicists. But what we have is that the mathematical physicists, so-called physicists, came into existence, and they are the ones who usually answer these questions, and they usually answer, or always answer them, with irrational explanations. That's where the problem is. We don't have rational explanations for gravity, for magnetism, for how the atom works. There's no rational explanations. And why? Because math can only describe. Physics is about explaining the mechanisms, and that's what we don't have today. Okay, let's get back into the show here. Here's a summary maybe of the hows and whys. Okay, here you can see it. Math, math just is a description. Maybe talks about rates, ratios, measurement. Religion, on the other hand, they do hows and whys as well. But what do they talk about? Well, they talk about how you should behave. They talk about opinions and recommendations. Okay, and that's where the problem is. That's what religion is. Religion is not really about God. It's about, opinions and recommendations. And what's the purpose of religion? Well, what religion wants to do is persuade. Okay, it wants to be able to convince, convert, and recruit you. It deals with maybe morality, politics, ethics, those kinds of things. And those are all opinions, and science is objective, whereas religion is subjective. So that's essentially, the chart that puts how and why in the proper context. Okay, so that's where we start. And well, why is this important? Well, let me put this chart back up there. Because Al-Khalili, as you've seen these last couple weeks, or more weeks, he's on that mathematics side, or he's on the religion side. He's never at all in the science realm. He's never in there, especially in physics, where he's supposed to be. That's essentially what he says that he studied. That's what he tries to spread out there. He never does physics. What he does is either mathematical descriptions with irrational physical interpretations, or he does religion. He just gives his opinion about something, a recommendation or whatever, primarily opinions. And this new fellow, Richard Dawkins, appears to be in the same boat. So who is Richard Dawkins? Well, let's give a quick synthesis of who he is. He's a biologist, ecologist, studied at Oxford University. He says he became an atheist after reading Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. Bertrand Russell said he was an atheist. Maybe I should write a book saying why I stopped being an atheist. Yeah, I used to be an atheist also, and I got out of it. Did I become a Christian, a Muslim, Buddhist? No, I became a scientist. And science is at odds with atheism. Atheism is unscientific, okay? And I'll probably be dealing with that next week, next time around, okay? By the way, on Friday, I'm going to be interviewed, and I'm going to post that later on. I'm going to see how it works. Interviewed on my past experience with spying, okay, Marxism and that kind of thing. Okay, so yeah, he wrote The Selfish Gene, 1976, became kind of famous for that, and he's won all these beauty contests, all these prizes, medals, Olympic medals that they give out there, and became a fellow of the Royal Society in 2001. That's like giving you prizes for intelligence. For beauty, we give prizes to the girl who's the most beautiful. To the fastest runner, we give them a little medal also for being the fastest runner at the Olympics. And mathematical physics has done the same thing. They give prizes for intelligence or for knowledge or for whatever, for discovering something, in many cases accidentally, like Penzias and Wilson did in 1963 with the background radiation. Okay, so this is good old Dawkins today, but I look at him more like this, I think he's more like a caricature of science. I don't have much respect for him at all from a scientific perspective. And why is that? Well, let's find out. He wrote a book, and that's what Al-Khalili did not interview him, but they had a little chat on science. And it came out of that book that Dawkins wrote. And this is the book, okay? It says Science in the Soul. And I started suspecting that book because it had the approval of two people who certainly are not scientists by any means a stretch of the imagination. One is Michael Shermer, who is a editor of Skeptic magazine. Another one is this James Randi, magician. I had a little bout with Randi a couple years ago, and he supposedly tries to debunk all non-scientific proposals. And so I questioned him about energy. And so we went back and forth on the issue of energy. He couldn't believe that I was saying that there is no such thing as energy. And I said energy is a concept. And he couldn't accept that, and he cut me off. He blocked me. Okay, and so these two guys vouch for Richard Dawkins' book. And as you can see, Shermer says, no living scientist is more deserving of such recognition than Richard Dawkins. Not a high recommendation coming from Shermer, okay? At least in my opinion, whose every book reflects his literary genius and scientific substance. Science in the Soul is the perfect embodiment of noble quality literature. Yeah, they talk about prizes, and they talk about science. Let's find out if these people have any idea what science is and what the purpose of science is, okay? And Randi says Science in the Soul is packed with Dr. Dawkins' philosophy, humor, anger, and quiet wisdom, leading the reader gently but firmly to inevitable conclusions that edify and educate, while dropping in periodic mots that seize attention rather firmly. Okay, and again, these people are giving kudos to Mr. Dawkins, and the question is whether any of them are doing science. Okay, so let's get to that. Let's see if we can find out if these people are doing science. What does Dawkins say in his book? Well, essentially, this is what he summarizes it in a sense, okay? And he says it's a battle cry against irrationality. That's what the book is about, okay? That's what he tells Al-Khalili. And he mentions a couple of examples. He says homeopathy, telepathy, and water divining, and all the things that have no scientific justification, but which have a kind of appeal, almost like the appeal of science fiction. Oh, I thought it was the mathematical physicists who do science fiction. So this is news. These guys think that these other folks are alchemists or astrologers. They dismiss them as such, cranks and crackpots, because they deal with such issues as telepathy and water divining. And the question is, what do they do in exchange? I mean, is theirs any better? Like, here's a list of irrationalities of math. Okay, black hole, zero-dimensional nothingness, dark matter, ultra-heavy, invisible stuff that they put in the equations to make them come out right, to mimic what they see out there. Particle at two places at once. What sense does that make? What proof do they have? What evidence do they have for that? Wave-particle duality, can you draw it? Can you make a picture of it so I can see what you're talking about? Entanglement, tunneling, decoherence, superposition. What are those nonsenses that they had to invent, to be consistent with the uncertainty principle, which means that they don't know nothing? That's essentially what uncertainty means. Multiverse, you branch off, every step you take, you branch off in a different universe. Big Bang creationism. How is that any different than telepathy, water divining, and homeopathy? Okay. So yeah, so I think what these people, he says, he adds there, the appeal of a kind of romance of science without the rigor of science. Are any of those on the right-hand side rigorous? I mean, as far as the physical interpretation, okay, the explanation. And my answer is absolutely not. I mean, I want a rational explanation. And just in case you might say, well, Bill, that's because you don't understand. No, these people are telling you in your face that they don't understand their own theories. So you get these mathematicians, they go in there and they say, you ask them whatever, gravity, how does it work? And the guy says, well, it's the bending of time. And you say, well, that sounds kind of odd because time I thought was a concept. How do you bend time? Well, yeah, we don't understand it either, but it's been proven. And so you end up like saying, and if you really want to understand, you got to take a math course at the university level. Then you'll understand. And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. You leave saying, well, what did I learn today? I learned that I got to go to college and be brainwashed like they were. That's what I learned. So yeah, we got a problem because we don't have answers. And you get in the Quora where I write articles every now and then, and people ask qualitative type questions. They don't want you giving them a bunch of equations. They want to know how gravity works, how a magnet attracts another, how electricity works, what ionization is, and so on. And these people give them nonsense. They give them nonsense. They give them equations. They give them opinions. And they claim it's been proven. And then immediately they say, oh, but we don't understand it. And if you really want to understand, you got to go to college. So, yeah, people come out as dumb as they came in, or even dumber. They say, oh, thank God there's someone out there who knows all this stuff and does all that math, and that we have all this technology thanks to them, because otherwise, I wouldn't have my smartphone, and I wouldn't have, GPS and whatever. Okay. Al-Khalili says to Dawkins, he said, we used to live in a village where everybody knew each other. No, Dawkins says this, sorry. Where everybody knew each other. You have a small village, everybody knows each other. And today we are in a global village connected through the internet. They're saying that's somewhat positive. To a degree it is, here, you have a chance, like through YouTube or whatever, to communicate the potential, right? To communicate with the entire world. But what is the problem? There are some problems with that as well, because you also have this situation where today we have more censorship because we found more efficient ways to discover dissidents and more ways to silence those who oppose Big Brother theories. The internet also is way overcrowded, and it's almost impossible to get a new theory out into the world. Not so that people will believe it, but so that people are aware of it, options. This is no longer possible. You got so much overcrowdedness out there that people have trouble finding, needles in a haystack. And because of that, there's an elite that can voice their opinions. People like these two fellows here, always proposing ridiculous explanations for physical phenomena, whereas rational folk who realize that the explanations are bogus are summarily brushed aside and treated as demented cranks and crackpots. So so even though, yeah, in the old days, you were able to silence the guy in the village whom you didn't want to voice his opinion because, maybe the priest wanted to give a different message and this guy was somewhat of a troublemaker. So you could identify that guy in the village, right? And isolate him somehow, punish him or whatever. And today, we don't dip people in the water in a cold bath as they used to in the old days for violating something of the church or whatever. Today, what they do is they, on the one hand, they have all these elites, and what they do is they censor you essentially by not allowing you to publish in their magazines. And their magazines have become the focus, what blogs and so on look at and try to translate for the masses. So you got to go to their magazines for that. And you can't publish in their magazines because they're not interested in physical mechanisms. What they're interested in is equations and measurements. That's all they're interested in. That's what their magazines do. So when you go look at a physics paper, it talks about a bunch of equations and how they settled something in math. And then they give you an irrational physical interpretation, or that's what the blogs take out of there, and that's what they publish. You have these popularization magazines and so on, and that's what they give the public. And you can't penetrate that world Because in order to penetrate that world, you got to go into the world of math and publish math, when that's not what your intention is. Your intention is to explain a mechanism. And what they do is they say, well, that's philosophy. That's on the other side of campus. Okay, so you go to the other side of campus and say, okay, let me publish here in the philosophy magazines, since apparently this is philosophy, right? And they say, look, we've already got it settled. See, we receive our cues from the mathematicians, and all we do is analyze quantum mechanics and relativity. Do you have something to offer us within that world? And you say, well, I don't agree with relativity or with quantum mechanics or string theory. I've got a different proposal. And no, you can't get it in there because they say, well, go through the mathematicians first, see if they approve it. And so you get this runaround, you never get it in there because all you want to do is just tell people a different side of the story of how this universe works. And that's over and done with. You know, you can't get it because you have this close loop circle where the mathematicians feed the philosophers philosophize, whatever, they come to their own conclusions, they write a lot of stuff about that and whether it's right or wrong and this and that, and they have their world, the mathematicians have their world, and we have a crazy world. We only have irrational physical interpretations for everything. And how do you get in there? Well, you can't anymore, and that's why this global village is a blessing, it's also a curse. Right? So I don't know about global villages anymore. And so these two folks continue. It says, Al-Khalili, it's so hard to change someone's view. If they believe in something or won't believe, it doesn't matter what logic, what evidence you present to them. They'll stick to it. And Dawkins answers, you and I are both in the business of trying to convince people of the things. And as you say, it is difficult. I really haven't developed any technique apart from just putting it out there. So these people think, these two individuals believe or were taught or memorized by heart that the purpose of science is to persuade, to convince people, to get them to believe. And they say it's so hard because people have these notions that they got maybe from their parents or from school or from church. They have these ideas, and these people say, we're trying to change all that. We're trying to get you to believe something else. And it's so hard to convince you that there is no God, for example. That's not the purpose of science. Science is not there to tell you what the opinions of these guys are. And they claim they've proven it, but then they immediately say they don't understand it. So what is it that they proved? They certainly didn't prove a mechanism of how this universe works. And that's what they're addressing because they're saying, oh, there is no God. God does not run things. The angels don't run things. There are no spirits. And they brush all that aside, but what do they put in instead? They say, well, there's energy, and there's mass, and there's all these fields out there. Well, it looks like you're talking about spirits as well. I mean, what? And there's bent time, you know? I mean, what is all this? What are we talking about? What do you mean bent time or warp time? What do you mean you transferred energy? What do you mean there's a mass, a very heavy mass, invisible, intangible, obviously, that pulls on a star from very far away? Well, what is all this nonsense? You're talking about spirits as well. But they won't allow you to criticize that again, okay? And so these people get a free reign, and they can go on out there and just say whatever they want. As far as physical interpretations, because they're not going to be talking to mathematicians. They're going to be talking to the general public, and they can't put an equation in there, you know, and say, look, this is the equation, you know, especially if it's a sophisticated equation, people will lose interest immediately. Now they have to try to bring it down to the masses and say, well, this is what we mean. Okay, what did you mean? Well, there's warp space and warp time. What do you mean there's warp time? Well, yeah, that's the way we explain. Here's the equation. You would have to take a course in math to understand the equation, and meanwhile, you just have to accept our word. Well, that sounds a lot like that little village there where the priest would tell them, you know, the Bible says so, and you got to believe because it says so in the Bible, and since you guys don't know how to read, and I'm the only guy in the village who knows how to read, I'm passing this information on to you. You got to believe me. Otherwise, you'll be punished. You won't go to heaven. And these guys say the same thing. They say, you will be punished. You will not be allowed to publish. In our magazines, at least. Okay. And yeah, they dominate that world, and so you can't get your foot in the door. That's what it is. And so a lot of people are looking for real answers, rational answers, and of course you'll never find them in mathematical physics. All you have is irrational physical interpretations for invisible, intangible phenomena. The visible stuff, tangible stuff, we figured all that out. That's a no-brainer today. Essentially, most of them at least. Maybe you might have questions about air. Well, is there something called air? I pass my hand or something there, but I don't see it. So you might have a different idea about that. But if it's visible, intangible, we got to figure it out. In macro, we got to figure it out. It's the invisible micro stuff, the macro stuff that we can't see. Those are the ones that we're having trouble with. And we have no solution from the mathematical establishment. Okay? Well, they continue. Not only are they trying to persuade, but they give you an idea of what belief is. They have a different interpretation of what belief is. And this more or less explains their atheism. Okay? And here it is. In science, when we use the word belief, we mean something different from lack of evidence, okay? Faith-based belief. So we sometimes use the word belief rather sloppily. I don't know what other word they can use, so I'm not sure how sloppily that is, okay? When we maybe should use a different word. What other word are you going to use? You're talking about belief. But what are they talking about? Someone asked the question, and the audience asked them, it was a public talk. If science is about looking for truth, how does that differ significantly from religion and God? And one of them, I think it was Richard Dawkins, who answered, we look for truth using evidence. So they're seeking truth. And truth, I thought, was an opinion. What is true to you is a lie to your neighbor. And these people are looking for truth. They're looking for truth using evidence. What evidence convinced them does not convince their neighbors, right? That we can actually go out and test experimentally. How can you test experimentally something that is invisible and intangible, such as the mediator of gravity? What kind of test can you run? Just let go of the ball and see how it falls to the floor? Is that the test that you're going to run? I mean, you can't, through an experiment, determine what gravity is and how it works. For that, you got to sit back and visualize. That's not what these people do. They're looking for evidence to convince them. And so when the other guy, the religious, the traditional religious, because they're religious too, but the traditional religionist comes in there and says, well, we do it with spirits. We have these angels that pull the ball down. I mean, maybe that's their explanation. Maybe they say it's the angels, God's angels that move the earth around the sun, or whatever. And these people say, you're such an ignoramus, Of course not. It's warped space. It's warped time. It's, what is it? Negative momentum. You throw the rock and the tree comes towards you. So how is one different than the other? How is one more scientific than the other? What experiment are you going to run to test, this theory that these people have? There is no test. There is no experiment you can run on intangible, invisible mediators. And so I don't know what these people are trying to do if here they are in the 21st century, they haven't realized that you can't figure out the invisible, intangible mechanisms through experiments. Period. We're done. Okay. Okay, so here I put Plato because let's put this guy back up here. These people talk about knowledge, how they know or how they believe really. And all they're saying is that they're harping on that justified true belief that Plato talked about. It's that's what knowledge is. And what they're talking about, they have knowledge, whereas religion has belief. But it turns out knowledge is belief, according to Plato, and that's what we're still using today in all of so-called science, philosophy, physics. And what these people are saying, essentially, through experimental and, evidence, they're saying it's got to be justified. That's the word they're harping at when they say that theirs is different than just ordinary belief. It's the justified part. And so the question is, again, how justified are they in saying that their stuff is any different than a person who proposes angels and spirits that we can't see and touch or prove. And they're saying the same thing. They're using mediators that we can't see, touch, or prove. They're using energy. They're using field. They're using, time. So mass. What are we talking about? We're talking about concepts. You can't do gravity with mass. That's okay for the equation. Use whether you use Einstein or Newton, it doesn't matter. You can put mass in there, fine. That's a calculation. I want to know the mechanism. What's the physical mechanism? That's when they bring the mass, the energy, the field back into physics when they're not supposed to, because those words do not belong as objects in physics. And so this is where we have a problem. They're bringing all their math gibberish into physics. Okay, and then they finally tackled a question, these two fellows, and they said, talk about a subject we talked about a week ago, free will versus determinism. And they say free will is an illusion. Al-Khalili says this, okay? Everything that I do is determined. And where do you get that? From the block universe. That's Einstein's, equations lead to everybody in relativity today saying the block universe is out there. Everything has already happened. God there, he's already, from his point of view, he can see everything. And he says, it's already happened. I know, God knows, because he knows everything, right? So he knows what happened already in the future. He can see the block universe. He can see the future, the past, everything. We can't. We can't see the future. We can memorize or remember the past through people who, put it out to us, but we can't see the future, okay? And so he says, however, it's such a powerful illusion, free will, that you might as well forget about that. All of us behave as if and believe as if we do have free will. In other words, there's this deterministic universe. It's already done. It's already happened. And this fellow says, but we act as if we had free will. It's like, yeah, the block universe exists, but it doesn't matter because we act as if we have free will. That's a contradiction. Either the equations show and prove and demonstrate and experimentally provided evidence that the block universe is there and we're just walking on footsteps, or we have free will. We can't have it both ways. Either the movie has already happened and Bugs Bunny has to do whatever the artist programmed and prescribed for him, or Bugs Bunny can act outside the role that predestined for him. Well, one or the other. You can't have it both ways. And these people keep debating this here 2,000 years later. They're still debating the same issue, and now they claim they do it from a scientific point of view, that they have proof, and the proof is that the future has already happened, because otherwise Einstein's equations are wrong. And so if it's already happened, if everything has already been predetermined, then there is no free will. But they say we have free will anyways because we don't know what's going to happen. It's irrelevant. Your knowledge is irrelevant if the future has already happened. It's an irrelevant word to introduce into discussion. He says, we live in a deterministic universe. He reinforces this, right? We live in a deterministic universe where the laws of physics, whatever those are, we don't have laws in physics, and no one legislated that, no God there to legislate or Congress, where the laws of physics will determine cause and effect into the future, and therefore we don't have free will. Everything is preordained. This is an atheist talking here, okay? But we are unable to predict what the future would be. Yeah, so who cares? That's your problem, but the future is there, you're saying, already. So it doesn't matter if you have knowledge of the future, but you're saying that already exists, and you're just going to walk on footsteps that have already been put in there, I guess, by God. I don't know who made the block universe. Okay? We can't see the future. Yeah, you can't see the future. I mean, has the big crunch already happened? I mean, if it's happened, why are we still here? And what these people want you to think of is a timeline where the time is a tunnel, time tunnel. And the big crunch, maybe, for example, is at the end of that process. And we're not there. We're still working our way towards the big crunch. So this is how they see this block universe, that tilted glass of wine, I guess. Okay. Everything is preordained, but we are unable to predict what the future would be. We can't see the future unless we could step outside of space-time, right? You can step like God there. He's outside of space-time, right? He can see it all. We can't. That's impossible. Therefore, for practical purposes, that illusion is real. So again, we don't care if you know and if you have the illusion. It's irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. And again, they digress. They go on this tangent to try to say, yeah, we can live with both. We can live with free will and determinism because even though everything's preordained, we don't know about it, and that gives us the illusion of free will. And what does another atheist, Mr. Dawkins, say to that? Well, he's more or less in the same boat. He says it, I guess, in different words, or he focuses on a different aspect, really. And here it is. He says, it's a separate question, which is a sort of moral question, which is if someone stands up in a court of law who's accused of murder and say, it wasn't me that did it, it was my quantum fields, do you still punish them? You know, it goes to this issue of responsibility, which again plays no role whatsoever in the discussion. These people are digressing and forcing you to go on a tangent in the discussion, and they never answer the question whether there is incompatibility between free will and determinism. It doesn't make any difference whether you think you're ultimately determined. If punishment has any rationale at all, might we say deterrence, then it's still there whether or not your actions are predetermined. Again, irrelevant to discussion at hand from physics. I mean, if they're going to introduce free will and determinism into physics, hey, let's deal with it from a physical point of view. Don't tell me what you believe or your recommendations. Like he says later on, I don't really think we could run society if we simply said that nobody has any responsibility or blame for anything because their genes or their molecules or their quantum fields are responsible. Totally irrelevant. They never answer the question. They just sidestepped it by saying, we don't know the future and you have to be responsible for your actions, irrespective of whether the future has been predetermined for you or not. That's the state of affairs today. We have these religious individuals who have taken over science. There is no, in fact, they haven't taken over. I want you to understand, we've always had religious folk running science. Today they call themselves scientists. Before they used to call themselves priests, popes, bishops, whatever. Today they call themselves scientists. They're not scientists. They're religious individuals who are now in charge of science. They call themselves atheists. They say, we don't believe in God. We look for proof, evidence through experiments. And then they give you this nonsense that, yeah, there is free will, but we also have a deterministic universe where the block universe already exists because it was made by, well, some say God and the other people say, no, it was made by itself. But whichever the case, we have this block universe, the future exists, but we still want you to be responsible for your actions, you know, because otherwise society would be a mess. Politics, recommendations, religion, that's all they talk about. None of that has anything to do with science to begin with, to bring those subjects in. But if you're going to bring them in there, let's address them objectively. Don't tell me what you believe or what your recommendation is for how society should be or should behave. Okay, so my summary conclusions, Dawkins and Al-Khalili are not scientists. They are priests. Don't mistake them for scientists, for physicists, or biologists in the case of Dawkins. They were taught what that science is, about evidence, proof, belief, persuasion, convincing, converting, and recruiting. That's what they think science is about, or physics in the case of Al-Khalili. They propose that we have no free will because the block universe, the future, is already out there. All we're doing is walking on footsteps. You're a cartoon character in a cartoon, in a little film. And you've already did the walking all the way to your death. You're already dead in the future somewhere, and all that history in front of you, because it's history for God, it's behind. For you, it's in front, but you're not aware of that history, what that history is. And so what these people are saying, well, you should act as if it did not exist, because we do anyways, right? And yeah, under rational science, all we have is the present. There is no future. There is no past. All we have is the present. Okay, and that's a long story, but that's essentially it. So to talk about the future, to talk about the past is nonsense. But you nevertheless behave and should behave as if it weren't because of responsibility and punishment, and because we don't know the future anyways. So that's who these people are. They are priests who have continued to dominate science, the scientific world, and today they just mask it under atheism, they mask it under mathematical physics, they call it science instead of religion. It's the same thing. We still have no explanations for common phenomena, especially invisible, intangible phenomena. With that, let's go with the fan mail. Had quite a few. I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to address all of it. Okay, but let's go with what we have here. One fellow says, what did he say? He says, let me give me a second here. Object. He's trying to define the word object. He gives me all this etymology on the word object. It says object is a verb. He says act versus resistance, a property of another act. Mass resistance against. He gave all this stuff. I think all he did was just transcribe, copy whatever he found out there and just put it out there. And it's very simple to answer all this. We wipe all that out completely. We laugh at it. Okay. The issue here is that etymology has nothing to do with anything. In other words, we don't care about the history of a word, whether it came from the Latin, the Greek, the Chinese. We don't care. First of all, etymology also includes the fact that words change over time. Okay, so they have different meanings as time goes by. That people assign different meanings to these words, or they modify them with time. And so there's nothing wrong with modifying a definition. That's the first one. The second one is that nothing is ground in stone. The second one is that we absolutely need to define words for science. We don't need them in ordinary speech. There you can use anything you want, okay? And but if you're going to use them in physics, you need to define especially the word object and the word exist. You need those two words because physics is the science of existence. Physics cannot do physics without objects. You need an object, okay? If you have absolutely nothing, whatever nothing means to you, you can't do any, you're not observing anything, you're not doing any experiments, you're not doing even what they say is science or physics. So you need to have an object. So you need to define that word. That's the first word we define in physics. Anyone who can't define the word object is not a physicist. And anyone who cannot define the word exist is not a physicist, because immediately they're going to say that this exists, or they're going to infer that such and such object exists, like, what mediates light? Is it a wave packet? Well, what's a wave packet? Please draw it. And they say, well, I don't have to draw it. Well, then we don't know what an object is. Okay? We need to find out what an object is. We need to find out what the word exist means. Those two words are sine qua non to do physics. And so in the case of object, we go in there and we find out that this is what an object is according to the dictionary and the Wikipedia. You can look up more cases here if you want. But we have all kinds of problems. The first one is that they use the word anything, thing, entity. Those are synonyms. So they already start out on the wrong foot, because they're already saying that a thing is a thing, an object is an object, an entity is an entity. That's the first problem. But then they include the criteria, and they say it's visible or tangible. Visible and tangible. Well, is there an object that mediates gravity? Because gravity is invisible and intangible. If there's an object there, we got a problem, because then you're saying that whatever's doing gravity is not an object. And that's when they introduce, either spirits in the case of traditional religions, or they introduce, mass and the word gravity itself, energy, fields. They introduce all these concepts to do their physical interpretations. That's where we have a problem, because now they're introducing modern spirits. Okay, that's essentially what they're doing. And so, no, we need to determine what an object is, and that word is very crucial. Or like I say, the definition of the word object destroys all religions. Okay, no religion survives. And if you go to a Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, you're simply going to laugh, okay? Because this is what they have. You go to the word object in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and they have all these things that they analyze for what an object is. Do they have a definition of the word object that you can take home with you, can teach to your kid? Absolutely not. All they have is a historical background for how different so-called philosophers dealt with the word object and how they differ from each other, and that's it. And you never find out what an object is if you go to Stanford. Okay? They have all these, then they confuse it with exist. Again, what human Kant used to do, they confused object with existence. They thought they were synonym. They couldn't figure out what was the difference between an object and an object that exists. And so they go into ontology. They go into existence, and that's what Stanford does. And after that entire analysis, you come out just as dumb as you came in because you never learned anything from them. That's why, these guys are not philosophers. What they are is recommenders. They talk about what you should do, or they talk about history, but not in other words, they're just laying out what different philosophers said about the word. That's it. And you never get to a conclusion. What is the conclusion? Do we have a result? Do we have a definition? Finally, after all these philosophers, so-called philosophers, debated the word object over thousands of years? Absolutely not. You still don't know what an object is. And you can see that the dictionary and the Wikipedia, at least, they continue using synonyms, and they still talk about see and touch. That's why I know that nobody knows what an object is. In physics, it's not. And here are the things that an object is not. It's not that which we can touch or see. Those are the first two we rule out. First, because those are verbs. And in order for something to do a verb, to move, to change, to do something, it has to be a something first. You can't have a change, a concept that changes. Not in physics. Okay, it's got to be an object that does motion. You don't have concepts that move. Love does not move. Energy does not move. Those are concepts. You can't say that energy was transferred or mass moved the box or whatever. You can't use the words like that. So see and touch are verbs. And aside from the fact that they need another object. So you can't use those because they're synonyms, essentially. You require another object to do the seeing and the touching. Hear, taste, smell, same thing. Mass, volume, not definitions of the word object. Okay, made of parts, mereology. No, we don't. We don't care what it's made of. We need to point and say that's a chair, that's a table. We need to name it. We need to first designate what an object is before we can, start talking about what it's made of. Okay, visualize through time, same thing. Temporal partitions there. Essentially, you see the movie. No, that's not what an object is. An object is a static image, and all these others. Color exists. 3D, standalone. An object has to be standalone. You have to be able to perceive it or visualize it as the only object in the universe at that moment in time. That chair, when you point to it and talk to the ET and try to explain your language to him, and you say that's a chair, for that moment, that chair is the only object in the universe. There's nothing else. You should be able to point to it like that. It should not be moving because there's nothing with which it can move, with respect to which it can move, and it's just alone, and you point, you say chair. That's how you present an object in physics. Okay? And so, the definition of object is that which has shape. That's it. Okay? That's what they missed all these years. But just as important is understanding how important the word object was for the purposes of physics. Nobody determined that in 2,000 years. Nobody figured out that the word object was so crucial. That's where they failed. All these so-called philosophers and physicists, mathematical physicists. Okay. Let me get more here. Another question here. Or a comment. Same guy, I think, talking about exists, real. And he goes again through the etymology of all these words. He ends up saying that motion is synonymous with exist. Exist is a static concept. It's an adjective. It's not a verb. Okay? You don't have to move in order to exist. Okay? You just have to have location. Location is a static concept, and things exist in a single frame of the universal movie. They have distance with respect to each other. So if we take a cross section of time, so to speak, make it as thin as you want, so there's no motion. Okay, we have no motion, no time. We just have that slice of the universal movie, just a single frame, no motion, no time, only location, distance between objects. That's existence. That's what exists. And there's no motion there. There's no time involved. No memory, because there's no other frame to compare it with. Okay? So yeah, this fellow confuses exist and first with object, but then you can look at all these definitions or synonyms that he puts there, and that's essentially what he does. If you look at the word, you'll see that reality, state of being real. What is real? Existing. What is a fact? Something related to existence and reality. What's being? Existing, life. What is life? To continue in existence. They're all synonyms. You haven't defined the word. All you did is put synonyms. Okay, so no, we must define the word object and the word exist, and you can't use synonyms. Okay, so any of those words that you use is simply, unacceptable. Not, at least for physics, for science. Okay, and here, put it over here. We have this situation where, again, you see reality, the state of equality of being real. Real, what is it? Real, existing. Actual, it's exist. Being, the fact of existing, and so on. So what is fact? Also existing. So all these words are synonyms. These are from ordinary speech. In other words, definitions that you'll find in the ordinary dictionary are from ordinary speech. You can't use those in science. We need to define these words in order to talk consistently, rationally in science. And so here's the scientific definition of exist, okay, so that you memorize it, okay. Physical presence, object plus location. Essentially, it's a localized object. And exist refers to that adjective there, localized. Localized is not motion. It just means that there's distance between all these objects. Cross-section of time, cross-section of motion, single frame in the universal movie. All you have in that single frame that you're visualizing is objects at a distance from each other. Nothing is moving. Okay, that's existence. You can say the tree exists. What do you mean by that? Well, in this cross-section of time, cross-section of motion, location, right? All we have is distance. And this object, God in this case, he's got a separation from all these objects. We need no math, no numbers, no measurement to determine what exist means. That's what it means for the purposes of physics. We can use that notion, okay, scientifically, consistently. Fellow the other day gave him some homework, and he was supposed to also get the definition of exist, and he's also supposed to give me an answer, if he could, on the brachistochrone. Okay, let's go with exist first. Let's see what he comes up with. Well, it turns out he didn't answer the question. He didn't do the homework on exist, so all I can do is just put his previous answer, which was like a week earlier, where he says exist. He just took it out of the dictionary, the ordinary dictionary. He says have objective reality or being, and the second notion is live or live. Okay, that's what he says. But as we've shown, we can't use any of those two from ordinary speech because in science. Okay, he likes that because it defends his religion. But obviously, you can see here that again, reality, the state of quality of being real, all these are simply synonyms. Being, reality, actuality, fact, all those mean the same thing. Live, they mean the same thing. Okay, so we can't use any of these notions. Okay, let me get him back in here. Where is it? Oh, the homework here. Okay, still don't have it. What did I do with it? I can't find it anymore. Okay, doesn't, I thought it was this one. Anyway, oh yeah, it's this one. It's got to be this one. Oh yeah. Okay, so yeah, and so the other issue is the brachistochrone. They have these weird names for these things. Maybe it's the last name of someone, who knows. And so he was supposed to find out or tell us, something about the brachistochrone, and it's got to do with this, the fact that a curve can be faster than a straight line. Okay, and that's counterintuitive to people, okay, because they say, what do you mean? I thought a straight line was the fastest path. No, it's the shortest path, the shortest distance, but not the fastest in time, in traveling. Okay, so we're not talking about distance, we're talking about distance traveled, so to speak, or time traveled, how fast you go through something. So what was the issue here? Well, you can see that the second curve, the one in the middle, is faster than the straight line, but it's also faster than the other curve, the one at the bottom. That one's slower than the one in the middle. And so the question is, if I keep curving that more and more and more, will I get faster, faster, and faster, or slower, slower, and slower? Okay, because I could also put these things upwards, and they'll even go slower. Okay, they'll go slower than the straight line. So what have we shown? We've shown that gravity pulls at a certain, or faster than a straight line if it's in that curve, but for that matter, pulls faster than in other curves. But you can see the curves are more or less parallel, I can say, for lack of a better term, parallel to each other. What if I make that curve completely skewed and make it go all around the universe, which was the question I posed to him. Okay, so here was the what he was supposed to answer. Okay, see, if you put the curve in the middle, it's faster than the number 3. The number 1 is faster than the number 3, but it's also faster than the number 2. And so the question is, if I go in a straight line from one galaxy to the next, from, say, Milky Way to the Andromeda Galaxy, we'll call that A and B, is that going to be, can we beat that straight line by going to this elongated curve, C through D through E? Obviously that's not what the brachistochrone curve is about. The brachistochrone curve only says that, if you go in a slight curve, you're going to go slower, faster, if you use gravity as what you're going to use in this case. Because if I make that number 1, if I go overhand, it's going to go slower than the 3. So a curve is not a curve, it's not a curve. And here we have a curve, an elongated curve. And the question is, will that curve be faster itinerary than going from A to B? And the answer is obviously not. So he didn't answer that question. What did he do instead? Well, all he did was came back and just restated what he considers a fact, and he didn't answer the question. Okay, what he said is, he said the following. He says, let's see if I can get myself here. Brachistochrone curve is the fastest curve. All other curves are even faster than straight. This works in whatever medium, air, water, and molasses. So he did just make a statement, an irrational, unsubstantiated statement. His statement is he didn't justify that. So he didn't do the homework. So I guess he just went to the deck with his cards. Okay? He couldn't show any cards. But when he has an answer, a justification, an explanation, physical interpretation, then maybe we can find out, because all he did was say the brachistochrone curve, all it does is use gravity to show that a curve is slightly faster than a straight line. Nothing like what mathematical physics says, that you can reach the Andromeda Galaxy in a couple minutes, whereas if you go through the curve, the elongated curve, or go through time or whatever medium that is, then if you go in a straight line directly, where we see Andromeda up there, we can go in a straight line. They say that's the slowest way to get there, because you're going through space. And so what is space? Molasses? I mean, if we go through time, are we going to go much faster? Why? What kind of medium is this time? If we're going through molasses when we go through space, give me an analogy what time is in that context. What is time? Give me a picture. I need a picture of time so that I know what tunnel I'm going through. That is so fast. Why is going through time faster than going through space, especially when Stephen Hawking told us there's no difference between a time and a space dimension? We're done. I mean, tell me what material it's made of that makes you go so much faster. That's the job of a physicist, not of a charlatan like this fellow here. Anyways, here it is. Another issue. It is useless to go down the infinite regress rabbit hole of explaining mechanisms with more mechanisms. No, we don't explain them with more mechanisms. We explain a mechanism. We illustrate it. We're done. If ropes explain atoms, then what explains ropes? Explain ropes? You can't explain a chair. But that's what this guy has on his mind. And what are ropes made of? Useless. Learn the wisdom of Newton's saying, I feign no hypothesis. It is better to just accept that gravity is what it is and leave it at that. So this guy says we should all be ignorant and just leave things as Newton did, because Newton at least was trying to answer the question. He couldn't, but this guy says you shouldn't. You should not answer the question because it's fruitless. And so here are my objections to what this fellow said or saying. Useful, useless has to do with technology, not science. Made of, that's mereology. It's unscientific. We don't care what something is made of. And in the case of ropes, anyways, it's very simple. It's two twined threads. What don't you understand of what a rope is made of? Very simple. I mean, just go to a hardware store, ask for a 2-strand rope, and you'll see that it's made of what? 2 strands. In science, we don't explain objects. We point to them. We don't explain what a chair is, what a tree is. We point to it first. Then you can describe it. But we don't explain them. So I don't know what he's talking about explaining a rope. And again, it's 2 twined threads. Very simple. Wisdom. He's saying that Newton had wisdom. No, it looks more like ignorance. When you don't answer a question, it's called ignorance, not wisdom. Okay? So, some people, all these religious folks enter science and they start babbling about their religious beliefs or recommendations, and they never bother even to read on what science is. They never try to analyze it to any depth. That's what happens. That's why they bring their religious beliefs, and these are the people who essentially are in charge of science today. Okay, another issue. If I can get it in there. Okay. So you're suggesting compatibilism. He's saying that, the free will versus determinism. How do you reconcile determinism and having free will at the same time? Well, I don't know where he got that. Absolutely not. Let's find out what compatibilism is first. Here it is. Okay, and essentially is the belief that free will and determinism are mutually compatible, and that it is possible to believe in both without being logically inconsistent. And again, that's the version of mathematical physics, not the version of science. Okay. What do we propose? We propose again that there is a single universe, closed loop universe, a closed loop thread. I'm sorry. And so all we have is a single frame of the film at a cross section of time, at a cross section of motion. And that single thread can only have a single location. In other words, all the single threads turns into every atom in existence, everything that exists out there. And so the entire thread can only have, for a cross section of time, can only have all these objects and can only have one location with respect to all others in a single frame. That's it. So there is no future, there is no past. The blocked universe is what we're trying to throw away, because that's what brings in this notion that there is compatibility between free will and determinism. There ain't. Everybody has free will. You can do whatever you want, believe me. Not because you're walking on footsteps, not because you're a cartoon character in a little film strip that someone already designed and made, which is the religious version, which is the one from mathematical physics, physicists who consider themselves atheists. No, there is no such thing as the future. Here we are. This is it. We're breaking ground as the line of the present moves forward. It's a cross-section. At any point in time, if you can even conceptualize that, just think of it. The only way you can think of it is a single frame in the universal movie. And all you have in that single frame is location, distance. That's it. Not distance traveled, distance, which is what mathematical physics uses, distance traveled. Okay, a couple more comments here, and then we're done. Let's see if I can get this thing up here. Where did I put it? They're so far below that it's hard to get them up there sometimes. Okay, this says, when are we moving out of Khalili story arc? He is stupid, but how about more variety, biology, evolution? Yeah, the issue is not Al-Khalili, because I'm not really doing Al-Khalili. I'm doing his analysis of different subjects. You got to pay attention to the subject, not to Al-Khalili. Al-Khalili is irrelevant because, to a great extent, a lot of mathematical physicists, so-called physicists, say the same thing he does in different words. And so I have to analyze him because he did a lot of stuff for the BBC and for the Royal Society. And so I do analyze him, but he's not the subject matter, essentially. It's what he says, the subject matters that he discusses. Those are the ones you got to pay attention to. Biology, well, I'm not too much into evolution in biology. The only time I talk about these subjects, especially evolution, is in the context of extinction. Okay, and in that sense, there's these different notions of what evolution is. That's the only thing I can add to the discussion, and that's that you have Charles Darwin's version, which is how many kids you put out. Okay, that was his notion of evolution. Then we have the economics version of evolution, which is survival of the fittest, which is not what Darwin said. And the notion that these people have, that you fight and whoever survives, that's the guy who gets the monopoly, so to speak. Okay, so that's the notion of mathematics, of economics, of business. They say, hey, we like Darwin because he said survival of the fittest. No, it's not survival. Darwin said have a lot of kids. Okay, and what does Bill say? Well, he has a different notion of evolution, and here it is. It's he who hasn't died is alive. That's it. Okay. So everything that you see that's living around today, it's because it hasn't died, and those that are not around or because they died. Okay, that's evolution, and that keeps moving forward. What dies stays behind, what lives continues. And you say, Bill, what's different that, or what kind of nonsense is that? Well, if Darwin has his way, which is, how many kids you put out. Well, one day I had a little accident that made me see the error of Darwin's ways, and that was that there was a spider, and she suddenly fell to the ground, and I threw a stone on her. I killed it. And suddenly, it was a female spider, she was pregnant, and I had all these, I'd say at least 100 of little spiders, all these baby spiders just radially moving out of the ground zero. Unbelievable. And I was watching that, it was like a shadow moving on the floor. And I said to myself, well, hold it. This spider had a lot of kids, like Darwin said. But if I throw a stone and kill all these spiders, which I did, there's nothing left. Well, it doesn't matter how many kids, how prolific, how fertile that spider was. If I kill all the babies, then what matters is how many of them die, not how many she put out. So it's the death end that controls who's still around, and not how many kids you put out. And the other notion which I introduce has to do in relation to extinction. And I always give that example. You have the last 5 Neanderthals that live on Earth, right? And they're in a cave, and they're drinking tea or whatever, mate, Argentine mate. And a boulder rolls down and kills all 5 of them. So now you ask the anthropologist or the paleontologist, how did the Neanderthals die? What made them go extinct? And he says it was a boulder. The boulder caused the extinction of the Neanderthals. Is that fair? No. The reason they became extinct is not the last 5 Neanderthals and a boulder falling on them. You have to figure out why they ended up with 5 Neanderthals. That's the mechanism of extinction. And again, you introduce this notion that he who's alive is because he hasn't died. And you got to figure out why the other guys died. And so that's how I look at evolution in that context, okay? Another fellow also said, Bill, you put out a lot of nonsense on the rope model, etc. He asked me, why don't you go see my site and check that out, and you'll see that you'll change your stupid rope. And you go to his site, and he says he's got new science. I said, well, I got to look at this because it's new science. And what does he propose? He proposed apparently old science, because what I saw, or what he talked about, right? Not that I saw, because he had no illustrations again. This is what he proposes. He proposes the ether. Now, is that new science? He's going to say that it's that light and gravity, all this stuff is the vibration of particles that make up the ether. And yeah, so we laugh at people who are still talking about the ether, and flatlanders and all these people, who have electric universe, who proposes electricity is gravity, and so on. Yeah, the ether died a long time ago, not because of Michelson and Morley. Absolutely not. The ether died already in the days of the Greek. Okay, why? Because they never defined the word ether, and ether just means a bunch of particles. It's a concept. And you can't say the ether does this, the ether does that. You can't say the ether vibrates, because there is no physical object called ether. Ether is a concept. It's a mereology notion of what something is made of. Space is made of or filled with particles. That's what ether means. And so it's a concept, and you can't say the ether vibrates, because you can say the particles vibrate. You got to tell me what is vibrating. Okay, and that's that background particles, radiation, whatever you want to call it, okay? And of course, you can never make sense of the ether, because you got to figure out, what's outside the ether, what gives shape to space, to this ether that's filled. I mean, are they saying the ether stops here and space continues? Or is the ether filling space completely, meaning that space has borders, and then you got to identify what's outside those borders, and so on. So ether is irrational nonsense. Anyone still proposing the ether should get a gun and commit justice. With that, I'll see you on Sunday, and on Friday I'm going to be doing a little interview on spying and communism, I guess, capitalism, laissez-faire, whatever, and the future, extinction possibly, very likely in there. And so I'll see you then. I'll see you on Sunday. And we're going to continue with Mr. Richard Dawkins, famous atheist. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.